If relevance is so critical and everything is so interconnected, how is it that we develop a level of understanding that allows us to really understand what's relevant and what's not? This segment will go ahead and offer an initial perspective on that, though later we will drill down even deeper into it. A situation, a problem, an issue, whatever you want to call it, is something that we perceive that we need to tend to. We have this perspective that whatever this problem or situation is really should be different than it is. And it's as I think I said before, considering the extent to which comments are made about people not liking change, we actually spend the majority of our life trying to figure out how to change things because we're typically not satisfied with anything. Though the situation, as we perceive it, is perceived as an event. There's a couple of reasons for that. Part of it is that we live in the moment. We may think about the past, we may think about the future, but we actually live in the moment, the now, the right instantaneous moment of this time. The things that we perceive as events are events simply because we didn't pay attention to the patterns of behavior that evolved over time that resulted in those events. If you if you go in the bathroom and turn on the faucet to fill the bathtub and you sit there and you watch it, you see the water level rise. And when it gets to a point where you wanted it to be, you go ahead and turn the water off. You've watched the water rise over time so that you know that filling the bathtub isn't an event. But if you go in the bathroom and turn the water on to fill the bathtub and you leave, and for some reason the overflow protection isn't working, and you forget that you're filling the bathtub, and 30 minutes later you remember it and you run back in the bathroom to find out that the bathtub is overflowing and flowing on the floor, it appears as though it's an event. It's the You weren't in a position to pay any attention to all of the things that transpired beforehand. So it's important to understand the current perspective of what the situation is. It's also very important to seek out and understand the patterns of behavior that have led up to the current situation being the way it is. Now, these are just four very common patterns of behavior that occur. There are a multitude of them. This is a goal-seeking pattern where the difference between a current situation and a desired situation transitions over time as the current situation approaches the goal. This is an S-shaped growth curve where change begins very slowly, begins an exponential increase, and then transitions into a very slow increase after that. Some situations actually oscillate back and forth, and that's the appropriate pattern of behavior. And then there are situations that present exponential growth, at least for some period of time, but nothing grows forever. So it is the time that we spend understanding these patterns of behavior that give us a better sense of how the situation got to be the way it is. If we look at the situation simply as an event, the only option that we have is to react to it because we have no sense of how it got to be the way it is. If we understand patterns of behavior, we're in a position where we can more intelligently respond because we have seen the way that things have changed over time. Though if you think about it for a moment, it should be apparent that these patterns of behavior just didn't materialize out of nowhere. There is, in fact, some set of interactions that are responsible for that set of patterns. The network of relationships, the interaction of all of these pieces are responsible for a set of patterns that have evolved into the event that we experience at the moment that we want to do something about. Now, I have continued to talk about relevance. All of the relationships in this mess are not actually relevant to the current situation, which is why it's important to begin with the situation and identify the patterns that are relevant to that situation, and that allows us to identify which of the relationships in all of these interacting components that it's important to pay attention to understand how the situation got to be the way it is. Yes, all of these pieces are connected and they're interacting and they're producing some sort of result, though are they producing anything that's relevant to the situation that we are trying to figure out how to deal with? That's why the guidance is always given that we begin with the situation rather than the organization, because if you simply begin with the organization, you don't have a basis for figuring out what's relevant and what isn't. And as I continue to say, relevance is the key to developing the appropriate understanding to figure out how to deal with the situation. Now, what happens when people realize that it's this network of interactions that's responsible for the patterns of behavior that's created the situation? Their first inkling or inclination is to go figure out how to change this network of interactions some way so that it stops creating this situation. It stops creating the patterns that led to this situation. The difficulty is that this set of relationships didn't come to be this way just by chance. It was, in fact, the result of some set of stakeholders who, at various points in time throughout the past, had thought about the interactions and continued to make alterations to create this network of interactions. Though what I think is absolutely choice about this picture is that it shows that each one of these stakeholders has a very different perspective on what it is that they're creating, which is why they typically create these nightmare messes that produce patterns of behavior that create situations that people are typically unhappy with. I once heard a comment that organizations are perfectly designed to produce the results they produce. They just typically don't produce the results that anybody really wants. And the key is that those individuals or groups that are responsible for designing the interactions are typically just not on the same wavelength. So that the real source of lasting change is to understand the various perspectives of the stakeholders and work with them, because they are responsible for the various components and interactions, and only they can change them. I often tell the story about why the jungle always wins. If you go into the jungle and you create a clearing, as long as you tend that clearing, you can maintain it. Though if you leave and go away for 6 months and come back, you're likely not even be able to find the clearing because the jungle has just taken over, because the natural state of things is for there to be a jungle. The natural state of this set of interactions is whatever this set of perspectives has created. So that if you change this set of interactions, though don't alter the perspectives which formed the basis of it, in time, they will just change it back to the way it was. So you can create a clearing in the jungle, though unless you actually change the context that's responsible for the jungle, the change won't last. So to produce lasting change, it's appropriate to understand the situation, the patterns of behavior, the interacting components, and the perspectives of the individuals. And here is the place that you really create lasting change, by working with the stakeholders responsible for the interactions which produce the patterns of behavior. So I hope you found this meaningful, and I'll see you in the next segment. Bye.